I think to start with, last month, China convened the Communist Party of China convened the Third Plenum of the Central Committee. Now, this is a gathering where key decision makers of China meet, and they look at how China will develop in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, this is very significant for us, and this is why we are having this discussion here. And joining us in our panel today is Professor Jebin Jacob, Associate Professor for International Relations and Governance Studies at Shiv Nadar University, Professor Arvind Yellary, Associate Professor at JNU, and Anushka Saxena, who is joining us online, is a research analyst at Takshila Institution, specifically the Indo-Pacific program. Professor Jacob, I'll start with you. The plenum document itself is a very long document. It's goes into several pages. I just wanted to understand what would be the key takeaways for, at least for India, which is, we are the second largest economy, and at a time when, there is increasing contestation at the borders. So how do you see that?
Thank you, Kalpit, and thank you, ORF, for this invitation. Let me also say thank you for being very flexible with the timings. As a faculty in a university, one has to, first and foremost, privilege one's class timings before, other events. So thank you for the flexibility. I'm very glad to be here with my colleague Arvind and Anushka joining us from Bangalore. So obviously, this is as Kalpit pointed out, this is a huge document. And, even the most experienced of us, after reading about 10 pages of this kind of language, we begin to see stars. So one of the things that I want to start with is, how do you approach a document like this? I mean, how is it that the Chinese look at this? So from a political point of view, right? So broadly, Xi Jinping tries to run, or the Communist Party of China tries to run the economy essentially by fiat and by politics. And Xi Jinping, as General Secretary, sort of brings in some of his own specialties, which is he has his call, he has a very strongly moralizing or moralistic approach to all of this. So now, given that you don't really run the economy by economic principles, but out of political thought or political thinking or political interests, naturally, any economy will run into difficulties. And these difficulties, then you sort of glorify, or you sort of give them a different name by calling them black swan events, for example, right? So what are these difficulties? You have low consumer confidence, you have a collapse in property prices. But if you actually take language from the plenum itself, they specifically say risks in real estate, local government debt, small and medium financial institutions, that is risks in small and medium financial institutions, and other key areas. So this gives you a sense of how or what the Chinese government itself sees as the priorities or the key danger areas. So real estate, because that's where a lot of money is floating around. Local government debt, because ultimately you need your local governments to run matters on the ground. They are the sort of the front line in terms of social spending, right? Small and medium financial institutions, these are the ones that lend to small businesses. So if these don't work, your regular small-scale enterprises, medium enterprises, they just don't work. And other key areas, of course, a broad catch-all category. So essentially, there are these difficulties, but Xi and the Communist Party, they essentially look at the Chinese economy as a political instrument. This obviously does not make sense to economists, to businessmen, or even regular Chinese consumers, right? To anyone who actually looks at the economy as performing market functions, buying, selling, all of that. But it does make political sense. This is what I want to underline. For the Chinese Communist Party, the economy is a political instrument which has political functions It strengthens the central government, the Communist Party of China. It keeps the regime in power, and it targets rival power or influence centers, which is, if you look at it, I mean, this is something that we are familiar with in India, which is the case of center-state relations. What is the purpose of tax reform or the GST, for example? It's essentially a centralizing of your fiscal power, your ability to, or your control over revenue streams, so that you are able to control political entities like local governments better. The Chinese did this in 1994. Fiscal reforms, the first major set of fiscal reforms they did in the reform era was in 1994. And essentially what we are seeing play out today in terms of local government debt, center-local crisis, etc., are the results of those reforms from 1994. And so the idea of a central government, whether in China and I suppose also in India, is to ensure that local governments listen to the central government. And so this is one big part of it. But once you have this kind of centralization, what happens is at the local level, initiative goes down. There is very little incentive sometimes for local governments to kind of do the things that the central government asks them to do. And if the central government also front loads social expenditure, your pensions and all of this stuff onto the local governments, spending for public health, education, etc., old age care, etc. All of this is the local government responsibility. Where will local governments go for money if they don't have access to tax revenue? That's how you have real estate bubbles, because the land is the one thing that state governments, either in India or in China, have control over. So you play around with land, right? So, to use the words of a Chinese analyst in a recent foreign affairs piece, she says, in the West, money influences politics, but in China, it is the opposite. Politics influences money or businessmen. Now, of course, since Kalpit has asked me to say, what are the implications for us? The one question I would ask you to think about is, how does it work in India? Does politics influence money, or money influences politics, or are we somewhere in a midway state, right? I tend to think it's sort of maybe swings back and forth. Now, in terms of the political assessment of the report, if you look at the language of the report, 6 or 7 things come to mind. One, the party has a very thin skin, the Communist Party. It has an inability to take criticism. So you see the language. The Central Committee gave a highly positive assessment of the success and achievements we have made in comprehensively deepening reform. See, it's already a mouthful. I'm already tripping over words. So the idea is to say that everything is positive. Second, it's clear that this is a very challenging and tricky time. So it says, in the present and the near future constitute a critical period for our endeavor to build a great country and move towards national rejuvenation on all fronts. This kind of language comes through much of the document. 3, there's a constant emphasis on obedience, right? We must thoroughly study and implement General Secretary Xi Jinping's new ideas, viewpoints, and conclusions, all right? Another place you say, we must acquire a deep understanding of the decisive significance of establishing Comrade Xi Jinping's core position on the party's Central Committee and in the party as a whole, and establishing the guiding role of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. So Xi Jinping, his name itself appears twice in this one sentence, right? Be more conscious of the need to maintain political integrity. Think big, in big picture terms. Follow the leadership code. So clearly there is some tension where the leader or the Central Committee or the Politburo Standing Committee is giving an order, but there seems to be some resistance, some pushback. So you keep re-emphasizing. And there's, at the end of it, the communique, in fact, they said the entire party from the leadership down must work as one to ensure the resolution is implemented. So the emphasis on to work as one clearly means it's not working as one. And then, of course, the resolution says we have dared to brave uncharted waters, grapple with tough problems, and navigate potential dangers. This is all code to say that there are tensions, but we don't want to clearly say that these are tensions. But this is our way of saying that uncharted waters, meaning, look, we don't know where the hell we are going, so please excuse a few bumps and crashes, but that's what it is. But we are grappling with tough problems. Now, unless you say these problems are tough, how can you give the leadership a pass for making mistakes, right? Navigate potential dangers. Because there are dangers down the road, the implication is, please keep listening to us. Please keep obeying me. 4, clearly the economy is not working. But the economy is not working in like 3 or 4 different ways. One, this question of regional inequality. So there's emphasis on fostering a fairer and more dynamic market environment. Fairer, the emphasis on fair means that not everybody the economy is not really working for all. There's a whole section called promoting integrated urban and rural development. This is a big challenge in China, the gap between the rural and urban areas, the income growth, the growth in income rates in urban and rural areas continues to diverge sharply. Okay, so the economy is not working for all. That's one way in which the economy is not working. The economy is not working according to design. So you have language like, we will build a unified national market and refine. The word refine is important. Refine the systems underpinning the market economy. So what the government is trying to do, or the party is trying to do by intervening in the economy, this is not really working. We must pursue coordinated reforms in the fiscal, tax, financial, and other major sectors. So clearly there's a lack of coordination. And I don't know how many of you are cooks. If you do, you need dough for making your rotis. So there's this language like enhance the consistency of macro policy orientation. Clearly they are trying to make the atta, get the atta to the right consistency is not happening, all right? The atta of the Chinese economy. Rectify deep-rooted practices of pointless formalities and bureaucratism. So, after 30 years of reforms, or 30 years of the tax reform, 45 years of economic reform, the market economy still doesn't function, right? And at some places, they simply say the economy is not working at all. So it says, make resource allocation as efficient and productive as possible. So clearly, a lot of resources are going into the Chinese economy that is not giving the government returns, adequate returns. It's not the most efficient use of money. Then they say we will ensure smooth flows in the national economy, which means there are no smooth flows. Number 5, there seems to be local resistance. I refer to center-province relations. So at the local level, there is a need for improving the institutions, quote, improve the institutions and mechanisms for fostering new quality productive forces in line with local conditions. So there's an acknowledgement that local conditions are different from what the central government wants them to be. But the central government still needs to acknowledge. We will improve national strategic planning system and policy coordination mechanism. Again and again, you will hear the word coordination. Improve mechanisms for implementing the coordinated regional development strategy. Integrated urban and rural development, right? So all of this. Number 6, constant linking of the internal and the external. So, when you become really big and powerful as a country, leaders can often use the foreign as an excuse to implement domestic agendas. Or you can say that your domestic conditions are such and such to go for a particular foreign policy action. So I think the Chinese, and to an extent India also, we have now gotten to that stage where we can easily sort of move between foreign and internal problems and say that one is responsible for the other, right? Please let me know when that, right? There is this line which says, advancing Chinese modernization in order to better deal with the complex developments both at home and abroad. So problems on the one front are an excuse to hold steady or ratchet up aggressiveness or assertiveness on another front, right? So when the Americans are asking for reform or whatever, the Chinese will say, no, our conditions, local conditions are what they are. But when the Chinese people are asking for reform, they'll say, no, we have black swan events outside, we have changes unseen in a century and all of that. So this constant use of the domestic and the external for the party's purposes. There is one line, or a few lines actually, on the Belt and Road initiative, and which is to say that refine the mechanisms for high quality cooperation. Now, whenever you say new or high quality, which means that the old and the current quality aren't functioning to our satisfaction, so we now need to go high quality, which suggests that there are some problems, not very clear, but then, there were always problems with BRI. And I think we make a mistake by assuming that the BRI was supposed to succeed 100%. BRI was never intended to succeed 100%. It was like, well, we'll see how it goes. And if we succeed in even 50% of the time, that's pretty good. That's a good rate of success, right? Yeah, so in the last maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I just want to talk about what has been the political response, right? What do we understand about what the Chinese government or the Communist Party is going to do? One, it's going to stay the course. So there is, as they say, full consideration to both domestic and international imperatives. Again, that internal, external, right? Ensuring, it says, talk about the communique, in fact, is very clear. It talks about ensuring both development and security, safeguarding national security and social stability. So you need both to work, and you can use either of these aspects. If you talk about development and security, say development, we need to do certain things in development sector because of security considerations, or we need to do certain things in security domain because of development considerations, right? Now, this does not necessarily signal determination, right? It can also mean that there's a lack of options. So, staying the course is also in terms of the centrality of the party. Now, they keep saying things like, we will strengthen the institutions through which the people run the country, improve the mechanisms for consultative democracy, enhance the institutions of democracy at the primary level, right? All of this sounds great. But how do they end it? And build a broad united front. So you can have all the democracy you want, but at the end of the day, you have to toe the line, which is the broad united front, right? Then who determines the united front or the line? The party. Number two, in terms of rhetoric. So there's a lot of rhetoric, high quality development, Marxist rhetoric is also there, new development philosophy, systematic and holistic plans. But there's also a lot of gibberish. And it's okay to call it gibberish because some of it just doesn't make sense. High standard socialist market economy, advancing whole process people's democracy. It might be a bit unfair to say whole process people democracy doesn't make sense, but I'll come to that. But I just want to say how they sort of market what they are trying to say. 5-sphere integrated plan. I mean, Arvind maybe can explain a bit more about what 5-sphere integrated plan is, because 4-pronged comprehensive strategy, a lot of numbers and a lot of adjectives thrown in, right? We must consolidate foundational systems, refine basic systems, and innovate important systems. I mean, if you are a fan of China studies, this is great. You just have fun reading this. If you're coming to this as the first time, you're all at sea. But I have fun. I've learned to have fun reading this stuff. And I sort of hope you will all have fun now, having heard this, to go back and read all of this, right? Applying systems thinking, right? So all of this, to my mind, doesn't really always make sense. Something interesting is the point number 4, which is of advancing dates. So this is sort of something that we heard in the previous discussion on the Third Plenum as well. So now I think we see this date 2029, the 80th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. Before, it was the 2 centenaries. 2021, 100th anniversary of the party, and 2049, the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic. But now we have a new date. It's as if some dates are being advanced. And sometimes dates need to be advanced because people are getting restless, or you're not meeting your targets, so you just need to put people under more pressure, so advance your dates. Before, there was a date between 2021 and 2049, which is 2035. But now suddenly you have 2029. There's another date, which is in 2027, which is the centenary goal of the People's Liberation Army. So, by which date it has to achieve basic modernization, national defense, armed forces, and so on. There's a point number 5, which is a very interesting relationship between technology and culture and propaganda, right? So we must stay abreast of the latest trends in information technology, cultivate a vast pool of talented personnel in the field of culture, and ignite cultural creativity of the entire nation, right? We will improve the responsibility system for ideological work. So whatever they talk about technology or cultural work, it's all connected immediately to ideology, right? Finally, how is the party heading off or dealing with dissent, right? This is a central question. One, through administrative reforms, right? So the communique talks about, or the resolution talks about improving systems under which people's congresses conduct oversight of the administrative, supervisory, adjudicatory, procuratorial organs. Okay, all of this. So whatever organizations that are in existence, we will improve them. Two, institutional reforms. Again, we'll expand the role of certain organizations such as the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. This is an advisory body in the Chinese state system, but there is some talk about we will refine the mechanisms that enable in-depth consultations and interactions. So the CPCC is kind of like our Rajya Sabha, to a closest equivalent. Not exactly, but the closest equivalent. But doesn't have legislative functions, just an advisory function. But it seems to be a way the party seems to be thinking that this is one way in which we can let off the steam, have people participate. But this has to be, quote unquote, well-ordered participation of various primary level organizations and local people in the governance of their communities, right? So this is an example of whole process democracy. We are expanding certain institutions in terms of their functions, right? Another thing is workers' congresses. Not so much emphasis on trade unions, but workers' congresses, so which will continue to take their instruction from the party. Fourth, legal reforms. New laws are being promoted, on promoting ethnic solidarity, on ensuring religions in China are Chinese in orientation, etc. So these are political responses to disaffection in society, right? Finally, what is not mentioned very clearly, but what should be understood as implied, is the use of technology. One of the reasons for the confidence of the Communist Party state in doing all of this is its heavy reliance on technology. Using technology such as, social credit systems or facial recognition, etc., to implement some of these administrative reforms, legal reforms, and ensuring that the party has an eye on everything. So let me stop there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jacob, and thanks for that wonderful explainer on the third plenum to set the tone. I move on to Professor Yellery. Exactly last year, this time, we were sitting here and we were talking about the economic uncertainty over China. And in fact, Professor Jacob brought out this thing that the Chinese assessment is that everything is positive, everything is rosy. How do you see the structural issues in the Chinese economy, particularly at a time when there is a demand, like there is an entire debate on income equality, on having income equality, because Xi Jinping talks about common prosperity. So how do you see that? And also, there's one more thing, sir. You've done some seminal work on state-owned enterprises. 10 years ago, China was talking about giving the market a decisive place. Now, in this plenum, it talks about state-owned enterprises getting a commanding role. So how do you see the economic plan develop?
First of all, thank you, ORF. Thank you, Kalpit, for having me here. And let me thank Jabin also, and also my fellow panelist, Anushka. And Jabin, again, thank you for passing that ATA to me. I have a similar problem, judging the consistency. And you're talking about a leadership who are sitting with that ATA for more than 70 years and still finding problem with the consistency. And then the leader of these mechanics, engineers, President Xi. I remember last year when I was speaking, a lot of people even told me that I'm scaring them off, saying that I'm putting a lot of negativities with regard to Chinese economy. I spoke about the negativities, or maybe my analysis of Chinese economy was based on all facts. And from last year until this year, not many things have drastically changed in Chinese economy. Now, if you take this 1 year's template and put it into a larger context, then what the leadership is doing since 2013, especially the present leadership, then if you put more bigger canvas, the Communist Party, they're sitting with the same template, same economy for more than 70 years, and still there are problems. If you see Xi Jinping for past 10 years, he was, when it comes to political matters, he was even much more radical than Mao. But when it comes to economics, he falls shorter to Deng Xiaoping. He really doesn't know how to prioritize the issues and what is important for the Chinese economy to deal with. See, economy is not something which is made with extraterrestrial stones, waters. That economy stays in front of you. You have a geography, you have productive forces next to you, you have been working with all the variables, trying with different combinations. Now, if there is a problem in the economy, that means that you have absolutely misunderstood the priority of the economy. And when it comes to the third plenum, I'm going to speak on some of these major misadventures the Chinese leadership have been engaged with. Though it looks very rosy, they're talking about high quality modernization, they're talking about scientific innovation, they're talking about Kaifang. I mean, it's like more objective, scientific-looking reforms. I'm looking at 4 to 5 important factors, and spare me because I'm going to speak more on the fiscal and taxation and finance. If you look at the important emphasis the Chinese Communist Party has been, talking about, for example, governance model, they were talking about the control systems, and the fiscal and taxation, finance, consistency, and opening up. My first impression of the third plenum, is that the leadership still have to go a long way when it comes to the priority for the party and the state, whether they are putting priority for the Chinese state or for the party. I think there is major level of disengagement with regard to that. Why I'm saying so, because even if the Chinese state, Chinese party claims that there is a high growth, high rate of consumption, you have to understand that Chinese economy developed with the help of external conditions. Okay, it helped with an expectations when there were reasons conducive for the growth. Now, if you look in the present context, the domestic effective demand is not really that growth. Okay, it's still insufficient. If you look at the social expectations are so weak, and then given that there are negativities with regard to the international situation, it makes more difficult for the party to implement those decisions. Why I'm saying so is the entire governance system of Chinese economy is absolutely in big problem or big mess, I would say. 78, when China was opened up, it didn't have enough space and time to rectify or create systems, which would be incremental. They just went on to adopt what it was given to them, and then they had to multiply it. As a result of it, over the period of past 45, 50 years, China made a lot of mistakes, creating complex systems. And why I'm saying complex systems is because you do not know who owns what. Owns in the sense, not in the material sense, but who is accountable for one particular decision making. There is still not division of labor, division of responsibility and accountabilities. So you have bowl full of cheese. Everybody is claiming that, but nobody is giving back and claiming that, okay, how it has to be used. That's a problem. So we have the first problem with the governance. And once you have a problem with the governance, that means that your macroeconomic regulations are not in place, right? You are not coordinating the reforms. You are not prioritizing the systems like taxes and fiscal reforms, because you're talking about a second largest economy, okay, which still has to settle down problems with regard to taxation and fiscal reforms. Then you have a major problem with regard to efficiency and consistency. So these are the important issues. Now, let me start talking about the control systems. What I mean control systems, since the party and then the state is aware that what are the dangers are there for the economic growth, actually should become quite predictive that what should be our target for 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it looks to me that, from the past experiences, the party is not still able to take adventurous a step to improvise on that. I give you one example over here. Simple thing. When Xi Jinping talks about control systems, he has to simply look into, as Jabin was talking about it, you have limited amount of resources. These resources, you're not importing it. But if you're not using those resources efficiently, incrementally, and if you're not allocating those resources, that means that the entire problem is with you managing those resources. That's the first problem. Second problem is all about if there are amount of resources and stocks which the Chinese economy has been using, reprocessing, readjusting it, I think there is a major problem. What stocks should be prioritized first and what stocks should be prioritized second? Stocks, when I see these, are the hard capitals. Third problem is absolutely about the balance sheet management. Now, if you cannot balance, the Chinese leadership should understand that, they have to simply repair a basic automobile. They are not going to repair something, Starliner over here. This is the same economy. They have been handling it for last 70 years. They have to just manage the balance sheet the way that they have to cut off. You have the best example the Chinese had. There were large NPAs. Chinese had problems with during 1997, 98, and when these state-owned enterprises were closed down. They created companies of the NPAs and made them profitable. The Chinese is going to the same cycle, and they're creating huge NPAs, but they do not know how to manage that. Now, it is absolutely unbelievable that the Chinese economy is not able to find out what are those, predictive NPAs and how to fix them. That is, I think it's very surprising to me. The third important thing, I think I'm going to speak more on this thing, is the fiscal and taxation sectors. Now, one has to understand that, when in the recent Third Plenum, party leadership was talking about, efficiency and consistency, they put a lot of efforts on deepening reforms of the fiscal and taxation system. Okay, and unfortunately, I look at the priorities. The first priority was the governance system. Second priority was the control system. But the fiscal and taxation came at the fifth position. This is, in fact, the second most important thing for the Chinese economy to take care of. Why I'm saying so? Because there has been disproportionate revenue generation as far as taxation is concerned. There is no coordination as far as the personal income tax is concerned, or maybe the tax, which are being collected as the social security taxes. There is a major loophole in that. And if you have a system which is not absolutely addressing these problems with regard to PITs and, SSCs, that means that you are inviting more problems. There is no receipt. You're not increasing the receipt. Okay, you're just spending more. This is not going to solve the Chinese economy. Third important thing is what happens with the new taxes and what happens with the distribution of taxes to the provincial level. There are few taxes, if you see, have been collected by the provinces. Now, interesting thing over here, if you remember, Zhu Rongji in 1994, when he implemented fiscal policy and when he said that, okay, we are going to not give too much of credit, too much of fiscal assistance to the provinces, because provinces have land, provinces have resources, provinces have demography. But recently, you would see that what happened in the Chinese economy, the center is spending more when it comes to expenditures. Why? Because the provinces have failed to stand a chance to prove to the center that they are performing. The number of regions you will see, recently what happened in Henan, before that what happened in Shanghai, and in different provinces, the provinces are not really performing. And recently, after the GST was introduced in China after 2016, the center's contribution to the expenditure rose from 25% to 50%. The few taxes which were removed from the state list, from the provinces list, and the center is coming back to the center stage. What essentially is happening, if you want to draw a political line out of this, is there is a rising pressure on the center to implement PITs, personal income taxes, cut down social security taxes, at the same time fill in the places where the provinces are not accruing enough revenue. That means there is a pressure on Xi Jinping to re-centralize the entire fiscal system. I think in the all discussions, we do not really understand that. Everybody is talking about democratizing the taxation, but eventually there is no democratization of taxation going to happen in China. in next 5 to 6 years, you will see that there is a re-centralization. Center is going to play an important role. And if that is the case, Kalpit, coming back to your point, state-owned enterprises are the wolves out in the market. They are going to decide what is the innovation which I'm going to start with. Innovation, when we talk about in China, innovation is state-led innovation. It is state who decides whether I'm going to make a rocket first or a pencil first, right? It is the state who decides where the funds are going first. Here, innovation becomes absolutely a disputed word. And remember one thing I keep saying, to innovate, you need to have a disruptive mind. And CPC and the state do not want disruptive minds in China. So if you do not want people to think disruptively in a state which believes in a static and a status quo system, where the star you're going to get the innovation from, right? So you have the entire problem here. You have the structural problems, you have the notional problems, you have institutional problems here. Then in these cases, that means that there won't be any revolutionary thing going to happen when it comes to revenue of Chinese thinking. When this is the case, the provinces are not left with anything but to sell everything they have in-house, right? Oven, fridge, washing machines, and then trying every bit to keep the economy floating. That's the third point. Now, also, what most of us did not really underline is there are new taxes. And people will be wondering, what are the new taxes will come from? The new taxes, recently, last week, Taiwan implemented carbon emission taxes, right? That China is thinking to do. The provinces which are the highest emitter, we have to pay more taxes. That means people from those provinces, municipality, and autonomous regions have to pay more taxes. More taxes means people are going more nervous, more anxious about the state. Then there is a water resource fee reform. This is a reform which is yet to be tabled in State Council, but there are absolutely new thinking and underlining of water fee reforms. And third important thing, the volatile organic compounds. Most of the provinces are into the new material plus technologies, right? So now the Chinese State Council has come up with a new tax. It is going to introduce a new tax, which will be like any province which is importing more rare earth or using more rare earth in manufacturing will have to pay more taxes. So new forms of revenue generation, right? This is certainly not good. So these things are not explicitly said in the Third Plenum document, but Third Plenum document somewhere underline that we prepare for something like this. Okay, going back to the finance. Now, this is very interesting thing. In past, from 1978, finance is something which is a core of new economy. And if you try to see the major economies, American economy or the European economy, they have been using the financial system as a core of a new economy, right? And if you see, most of these economies have started working around the financial systems from maybe 80s and 90s. But Chinese have surpassed, in terms of their activities in financial system or using the financial system. Essentially, you need finance to run something, right? We need finance to come to this point and to start talking. Finance is something very important. Finance is resources. But if you try to see what made China to think financial reforms more important is the series of crises. Any crisis you start taking about, you start taking about the crisis which started from 2013, where it was large credit crunch. Then you talk about in 2015-16, you have a banking liquidity crunch. Then you talk about 2016 again, you have the debt vortex, right? Then you're talking about the 2018 liquidity problems. 2019, medium enterprises failed to the shortage of funds. Chinese enterprises are lacking funds. They need funds. And then the state enterprises, banking, do not have any idea from where to create funds. And then at the same time, you have 4 stages of complications. One is the major banks do not want to give controls to the non-enterprises, not state enterprises, to control of take care of the finances, right? Second thing, the banks have created their own proxies who are into the funding because they do not want to fall into the trap and the state regulations, state council's directions. Three, you have private enterprises who into the lending. And the fourth one are the internet banking. You had the Ant, you had WeChat, Tencent group. We went into financing. So the problem here is that the entire financial system in China is absolutely in major problems. And I tell you why. I want to give you a reason over here. If you do not want prices to play an important role to decide how the financial system should work, then it's a problem. Why I'm saying so? Because who have access to finance? Only few people in China have access to finance. State-owned enterprises, political members, political parties, political party members, and that makes the financial system absolutely unsustainable. And as a result of it, if you have an unsustainable financial system, it creates a lot of arbitrages. One is a spatial arbitrage, and second one is about the opportunity arbitrage. What is opportunity arbitrage and spatial arbitrage? Let me go into a bit of details. In China, I give you one example. When few years back, it was Wanko, or maybe few months back, it was Evergrande. When these companies were not performing, right, you had a choice to sell those stocks, right? But at the same time, in mature markets, who are the good investors will buy those falling stocks, right? In China, it doesn't really happen. Falling stocks means that you do not have any future. That means you're going to get bankrupt. That means that you do not have the higher returns on the higher risks. Any market which do not give you higher returns on the higher risks, that means that that market do not have a confidence of investors. So it creates an opportunity for arbitrage where people who have inside roles will buy the stocks and sell it in a bond market, stock market and bond market. This is in China getting proliferated. That means that the economy is getting hollowed from inside. The second one is the spatial arbitrage. It's only the coastal provinces who have the great access to the stocks and the financial system in China. If you go to Sichuan, if you go to Gansu, which is Lanzhou is the capital, they do not have an idea actually how the asset market works. What is bond market? Where they can be benefiting from. So you have a Third Plenum happening. You have these great mechanics sitting there talking about we can repair from a auto to starliners, but do not give that opportunity to the provincial leadership. Then the provincial leadership do not have a faith in the central leadership, right? You have absolute imbalance where you're talking about a leadership which is handling the economy for past 11 years, and you do not know maybe for next 20 years also. You see a serious problem. That means that you're not contemplating the long-term problems. Okay, let me go to the next problem, and that is opening up. Well, China has been talking about opening up quite consistently. I mean, every other forum, Xi Jinping will go and say that we want to open up. The details is that, as far as the third tier and second tier markets, the consumables are concerned, the Chinese are closing those markets for the foreign enterprises, foreign brands. Nobody in the state council or in the central committee uses iPhones. It is actually banned. There is only one option. You have to use either Samsung or maybe the Harmony OS, right? And this is just giving an example. What does that mean? That there is an implicit understanding among the party members that there has to be opening up, but that opening up should only help the Chinese economy. And what the Chinese economy is going to expect from the investments and opening up is investments only in the high-tech industries, the R&D sectors. Shanghai has more than 195,000 foreign enterprises investing At this point of time, okay? Gone were the years 2006, 17 when Trump said, okay, withdraw from US, you would withdraw from China. At this point, Shanghai has 195 foreign enterprises. There are more than 3,000 R&D labs in China, and it is increasing. So China is opening only in selective sectors when it comes to R&D, when it comes to tech-intensive sectors are concerned. Otherwise, the Chinese are not opening it up. Now, what does that mean, essentially? That means that Chinese are using opening up selectively to help the economy and help the domestic labs, domestic industries. And the last factor I'm going to speak about is the consistency. Now, the entire problem is that I'll just take 2 minutes. While the Chinese leadership is engaged into coordination, recalibration, cooperation in a number of areas, whether that is fiscal, monetary, employment, science and technology, and so on and so forth, there is a lack of coordination and consistency, and we have to accept the fact. Why so? Because at the end of the day, the Chinese state and then the party wants to intervene in the economy, but they do not know how much to intervene. What is the last limit of the intervention? Because anyway, the economy is run by the party. And if there are problems, the party has to own those problems. But interestingly here, party disowns the problem, disowns it. You must have heard about the famous rectification policies and rectification initiatives Xi Jinping took. Communist Party never says a policy has failed. It would always say that we have to reach it, revisit it, re-augment it actually. So you can read this thing as synonymous as failures. So these policies are failing, and as a result of it, why these policies are failing? Because there is no consistency on the side of regulators, on the side of political leadership. And this consistency is going to make major problem for the economic reforms. The last sentence is, if China wants to really expand and seriously work, and this is my personal opinion, that they do not need to come up with 40, 50 pages of reforms and guidelines. They need to prioritize what is an important. First one, they need to improve on the receipts, simple thing. They need to work on the seepages, that is NPAs, where it is not, those loans are not performing. Jabin has said correctly. They know the usual suspects. They know where are the bottlenecks. They're running an economy. And I think this is something very predictive for the Chinese leadership. And third important thing, if they want to take care of this control system, they want to bring in the consistency, they need to work minimal with regard to all the jargons, all the big words. As Jabin said, it's very already mouthful to talk about a lot of these words they use it. Simple things, simple priorities, and then the distribution of it. I'll give you one more example over here. The provinces at present have a lot of mistrust over the leadership of the Beijing. Because what happened in Evergrande? Beijing did not come forward and did not really help the failing enterprises. Well, good. This is China's internal affairs. You may forget it today, and maybe tomorrow you may be reading something else. But the problem is here. The institutional investors, foreign investors, looked at the face of CPC and invested into the Chinese enterprises. You can fool the Chinese. You can really not listen to your people, but you have to listen carefully what the foreign investors are looking at you. If there is no confidence of Chinese people in Chinese party, okay, we can understand that it's an internal matter. We can forget about it. But what is this opening up Xi Jinping talks about? If that is not going to ensure the investors of their funds, money, capital they're putting into the economy. I think these are the larger questions which have very simple answers for the Chinese leadership. I think that's where the entire void is there. The Chinese leadership has to think these things, quite in an elementary fashion, not in a supersonic fashion. I think that's where I stop. Thank you.
Yellery, you've you've deconstructed the economic issues and the economic challenges for the Communist Party leadership. Now, I'd like to focus on, in fact, this is where I'd like to get in Anushka. Anushka, I'd like to focus on the other aspect, the other pillar of the Communist Party, that is the PLA. In the last few months, in fact, just before the plenum, we saw the purge of the defense ministers, in fact, the purge of technocrats within the defense production. We also saw, the appointment of many politically reliable, quote unquote, politically reliable generals. The current defense minister is, he's not even in the Central Military Commission. So it's not like he's on a very important decision-making body. What does it say about the relations between the Communist Party and its gun, that is the PLA, at a time when there is great contestation, for example, in the South China Sea? How do you see this?
Greetings and big thanks to ORF, the brilliant speakers, and of course the audience. I would have loved to join this stellar gathering in person, but I am delighted to be able to share my 2 cents online, picking up from what Kalpit kind of just started, the trajectory Kalpit just started off on, right? We've just discussed a lot of interesting things happened at the Third Plenum. Obviously, it was much anticipated because of the usual timing of this particular plenary of the Central Committee being in the last quarter of the same year as the new Central Committee takes charge. But it came at a rather tumultuous time when China is battling both a slowing domestic economy and a hostile external environment. Kalpit talked about the South China Sea. That's just one of the many things China perceives as profound changes unseen in a century. But that's not all that was interesting about this plenum. It also came at the heels of, like Kalpit said, a churn in the Chinese People's Liberation Army and the overall security apparatus, including the Defense Ministry and the Central Military Commission of the CPC. It's safe to say that the Defense Ministry is demoted in the sense that the current Defense Minister is neither in the CMC nor is he a state councillor, as perhaps Li Shangfu or Fenghe, the previous 2 defense ministers, have been. And we've been hearing about this churn for the past year, particularly because of the sudden removal of National Defense Minister Li Shangfu this time last year, as well as the many purges of leaders in the PLA Rocket Force, the Air Force, Navy, and of course, the Strategic Support Force, right? The SSF's disbandment and redistribution into 3 independent branches on information, cyber, and aerospace has been one of the most prominent reforms in the PLA, I would say, and the CMC, even since the wide sweeping reform of the military as a whole was commenced under Xi Jinping in 2015. So I just want to structure my remarks on the talking points Kalpit has given me around 3 broad takeaways that I want to leave you with from the trends and developments in the military domain in China in the past few months, and how they may be connected to what the Third Plenum had to say. The first is that many have perceived the purges and the replacements in the PLA, the CMC, and the MOD, including its demotion, as a sign that Xi Jinping's authority is weakening. I would like to make the case that that is not true. The Chinese party state works in a manner that conceals skeletons in the closets of those that are at the highest echelons, especially considering many of their backgrounds are padded with either money or political support from the Politburo. In Li Shangfu's case too, it was a given that his proximity to Xi Jinping, in addition to his technocratic background and what it could do for the reforms, the proximity was the reason for his promotion to the post of Minister of National Defense. But Li Shangfu's purge is likely to have been a result of 2 simple but powerful, not even likely, we have the decisions document now, it is a result of 2 simple but powerful factors in combination, which explain almost the entire churn in the PLA, which is first, the actual existence of corruption and bribery to pad either one's own status or that of one's relatives and business executive friends, and the existence of inefficiency in implementing the reform vision and directives of central authorities. So any purge on account of these factors does not to me signify weakening authority, but rather a sense of comfort in one's position, that one can get away with the criticism of first a loyalist appointment and then the failure of that appointment's decision. Now, this is Xi Jinping's position today, in my perception. He can comfortably disband the strategic support force. He can purge corrupt officials, even if they are proximate to him, and move on like nothing happened. And the issue of factionalism, of course, is something that analysts have been debating for a while to kind of explain Li Shangfu's purge or other purges. And the argument is that factions do continue to exist and restrict Xi Jinping's powers. Now, it is likely that some quarters in the CPC may have definitely expressed dissatisfaction at Li Shangfu's appointment as Minister of National Defense so easily, which can be a reason why the story of corruption in the Equipment Development Department broke within the CPC. But are these factions, or not ossified factions per se, but voices alone strong enough to command removal or purge? I think not, because the current state of play with the fall of Li Shangfu and even Qin Gang, the former foreign minister, appears to be one in which factional struggles are intensifying, but not challenging Xi's position. So, in this struggle, rivals at relatively lower levels are competing for power and policy relevance and currying favor with the other while undercutting opposition. So, in that sense, I'd like to say that she has great control over both promotions and punishments. And if I take the example of Qin Gang, who was apparently involved in an affair scandal with a Chinese journalist based in the US, which is a form of straying away from party ideals in its own right, he too disappeared from the scene around the same time Li Shangfu did. But his exit was rather ceremonious. The Politburo meeting that in fact just happened before the plenum expelled, not even expelled Qin Gang, but rather referred to him as comrade and stated that he resigned his position due to ill health. So overall, Xi's willingness to sacrifice Li and Qin should be seen as a sign of confidence in his position and the expendable nature of cadres at that level. If, however, senior Central Military Commission officials and close confidants like the Vice Chairman, Chang Yuxia or He Weidong, they're sacrificed, then there's likely a deeper crisis at hand because it will signal that nobody's position is secure. Till such a time, anyone reading the Third Plenum decisions document should take into account how its language and the content clearly reflects Xi Jinping's priorities and legacies. May it be the fact that the document has a dedicated section on Xi's thought on culture, on implementing cultural unity and cohesion, or may it be the unusual inclusion of foreign policy and national security related concepts like the overall national security concept, which is celebrating a decade this year. Much of it screams Xi Jinping, but this doesn't speak to the fragility of the party state itself. Xi may be secure in his position, but his centralizing tendencies have definitely added to the system's fragility. And I think this fragility is something a lot about it has already been referred to by Dr. Jacob and Dr. Gallery. The second takeaway that I want to leave you with is the actual question of capability of the PLA, right? So the first bit was a little bit about CPC-PLA relations. Now, on the question of capability, it is an often highlighted argument that the PLA has not been in battle anytime in the recent past. It may not be prepared for a war over Taiwan or so on and so forth, right? The fact that the PLA isn't battle hardened should definitely be a morale multiplier or Josh multiplier for the Indian military. But the policy apparatus cannot take comfort in this. Because and hence it becomes vital to assess what the PLA is actually up to in terms of combat preparedness work, because they may not be a regular war fighting force, but they are trying really hard to become one. And in this regard, the evolving doctrinal instructions in the PLA and the reform agenda, they're important to understand. And I think my favorite go-to sources for stuff like this is the PLA Daily, which is the daily newspaper of the Liberation Army. And it tells me, my reading of the newspaper tells me that there are 3 important points of concern the PLA is required to address at the earliest to become what it refers to as a world-class force by mid-century. First is that jointness in the forces is supreme. Jointness simply refers to the idea that there is no isolated navy or air force or army, right? There is one whole military within what the PLA refers to as a theater. And in war, theaters are mobilized, not armies or navies. And forces attached to each theater are required to be seamlessly linked up, not just in capabilities, but also through a battle link or a communication network which means that in peacetime, they have to work these things out. They have to iron out practicing working together, practicing interoperability, use of information and communication technologies, and of course, co-living with personnel from forces beyond one's own. So if we analyze the case study of the recent kind of hush-hush replacement of the Southern Theatre commander, General Wang Shubin, with General Yu Yanan, who took charge, I would like to believe that a key reason for this was to place someone in charge who can enable this multi-domain joint operation in the Southern Theatre Command, especially since it's directed towards a very important theatre, which is in South China Sea. So while the erstwhile commander, his background was largely army-based, and it could have kind of made assimilating with the largely naval theatre difficult, the new general, Yu Yanan, is someone who has worked closely with party bosses via the Central Theatre, and he has been a commanding authority in the Joint Staff Department of the Central Military Commission. So these experiences make me want to believe that Yu's focus is not just going to be creating a combat-ready theatre capable of shooing away Philippine or American vessels in the South China Sea, but also a disciplined theatre that has interoperable weapon systems, forces, and personnel skills. And in this light, jointness continues to be a dominant theme of discussion in doctrine and commentaries. Second is that because jointness requires technological excellence in what we refer to as the information age, innovation and integration of science and technology, they become pillars of the PLA reforms, right? So if one looks at the instructions of commentators in maybe the PLA Daily, there is always a discussion on how a certain military brigade or even a police force corps is using digital platforms for communication, inquiry, and even recruitment, right? If you look at a recent edition, you'll find a similar example of the Jichuan detachment of the Gansu province police using such a digital service platform, right? And even information age warfare concepts such as electromagnetic warfare, they're becoming central to strategic discussions on how to design and deploy personnel and weapon systems. So the PLA is practicing how drones can suppress enemy air defenses without scrambling jets or missiles, how other kind of aerial transport can be used to supply troops in harsh conditions, so on and so forth, right? And many of these tech-related lessons are coming in from examples of the US military, given that China's lens of maybe looking at global security is highly tinted with the colors of its rivalry with the US, right? And so it becomes important for it to compete in defense tech, even if not necessarily in numbers. And talking about numbers, the third kind of trend I'm observing from commentaries and even regulations is that the PLA is facing a talent management problem. Given that combat preparedness and personnel growth are key to creating a world-class force, these personnel cannot be burdened with administrative tasks. But just like a researcher at a think tank cannot escape the clutches of organizing an event, even personnel in the PLA cannot escape the clutches of reading, memorizing, and summarizing documents, organizing inspections of higher-ups, arranging documents on a shelf, so on and so forth. So these are ills that the PLA doctrine refers to as 5 excesses. And in the past few months, there has been an explosion of commentaries on pertaining to how various group armies and units are circumventing the 5 excesses so that they can focus on combat work. Another factor here is that one of the key kind of below the neck reforms initiated in the PLA was cutting down of ground forces and other non-essential personnel, right? And the intended number of this demobilization was somewhere around 300,000. Now, new commentaries and even regulations are indicating that the PLA perhaps may not be ready to demobilize because its biggest challenge is the resettlement of the demobilized and veteran personnel. And as Dr. Jacob pointed out, this severely burdens local governments in a slowing economy, right? Because now they're being instructed to better manage such affairs and share the burden of financing resettlement. So in a slowing economy, this can be both a bane and a boon. It will be a bane for the indebted and the poor provinces and a boon for maybe local party personnel who have something to show for successful resettlement, since the system rewards local leaders that can innovate around central directives and earn praise. So in all, one must remember that the PLA may not be the largest standing army in the world, but it's certainly not Perfect. And with this context in mind, it is no surprise that the very short section the Third Plenum decisions document had on the military, personnel management, and jointness were the top two of the three priorities listed out for the modernization of the military. And I'll conclude with my third and final takeaway on why this matters to India. First, I just want to say that studying Third Plenum should matter to the Indian audience because our economy is deeply interconnected with China. And so when the decisions document says that the Chinese economy is going to focus on new quality productive forces, that high quality production. So what will their investment and effort in increasing total factor productivity mean for our own China plus one dreams and strategies? When the Chinese say that they have to retain dominance in the new electric vehicle sector, how can questions of overcapacity or dumping be managed here in India, given that we have flourishing trade relations with China? So these are inquiries we cannot ignore, and especially on the military front. Developments in China are relevant and crucial to India is something I believe I do not have to convince this audience about. For example, in India, we often say that along the line of actual control, China does not have does not have the aerial superiority advantage because we are in more mountainous realms, and that's how we've built our forces. But it then also means that all of the PLA's efforts are directed towards bridging that gap. So if one looks at day-to-day activities of the Western Theatre Command, they are aligned towards, again, like I said, testing drones for aerial delivery of goods, inducting excellent air defense systems like the HQ series, of which the HQ-9 is also commissioned by Pakistan in 2021, and so on, right? So we cannot take a lot of this for granted. And at the same time, India is embarking on its own path to theaterization of the armed forces, and the successes and shortcomings of the PLA make for great examples. For example, ORF recently published a brilliant report on higher defense organization reforms. And in there, I tried to suggest that India should adapt from the PLA to create theaters where theater commanders have the authority to conduct wartime mobilization, that we incorporate a combined arms brigades, combined arms battalion structure within each theater to enable interoperability of, say, weapon systems and capabilities, and that our own institutions, such as the Defense Cyber Agency, the Defense Space Agency, they go from places to plan jointly to places that enable joint planning. And finally, to bring to your attention the point I made about the three priorities for military modernization that were discussed at the Third Plenum. The first two, like I said, were about personnel management and jointness. The third priority is about enhancing military-civil fusion. Now, this is a topic of great tension in our country, right? For India, keeping track of China's civilian scientific vessels with dual-use purposes, keeping track of drone component imports that may be developed by civilian universities, but which are funded by the PLA or the MOD. They are all important prerogatives. But it should not discourage us from gaining from China what China has gained from the US. It is important for us to kind of develop a clear-eyed understanding of the economic realities and resist the urge to prioritize indigenization at the expense of building a robust and sustainable defense sector. So in this regard, it is important that India take a nuanced stance on how best to de-link and which sectors in the economy or in defense to de-link from China. So I just conclude by saying that beating the enemy and gaining from the enemy need not be mutually exclusive. And I believe this should be the approach on how India deals with Chinese modernization, both economic and military, going forward. Thank you.
Anushka, we have about half an hour, and before I open up this round for question answers from the audience, we've discussed broadly. We've discussed politics. We've discussed military. We've discussed the economy. Now, I think I just wanted to make. I just had one question. Since the pandemic, we've seen the whole social compact in China fraying. There were the COVID, the protest against COVID curbs, there were those mortgage boycotts. What does it say about, the plenum talks about a national population management register, a mechanism. There is also, post the plenum, there has been this entire movement on, the national internet users ID. So a lot of things on social control. I just wanted to understand, how do you see this entire the new social compact with China and its society?
Thank you, Kalpit. That's a reason why I ended my presentation with a reference to technology. An authoritarian state, in fact, even democratic states, they all believe that greater control over the population is, in terms of data, in terms of it is necessary as a matter of economic efficiency, right? In authoritarian states, there's an added component which is in terms of political control. So this new social contract, I wouldn't say that the old social contract has failed. What the Chinese party state is doing is build on its priorities. Its priorities, are essentially to remain in power. The first and most important priority is to remain in power. So essentially, it'll do whatever it takes to achieve that. From an Indian point of view, this is easy to understand. We have this concept of one country, one whatever, right? A single election cycle. We also have a national registry of citizens that we are planning to do. What are these efforts for? So the Chinese, essentially, it's a way of governance, right? It's the sort of overall approach is saying this leads to efficient governance, is database management. We are able to deliver services efficiently, etc. But it also has political consequences. And in the Chinese case, it's a bit more obvious to see. It's very clear because Chinese party state's objectives are very clear. It's spelled out in so many words in all their documents. For me, this is not surprising. It's a natural progression of any party state that is interested in staying in power. And it will use, and it has now the resources. It's not just it has the technology to be able to do this. So that's what I said, that you have social credit management, you have facial recognition, which means that your dissidents can't escape anymore. Your points of view need to be recorded or will be recorded whether or not you like it. You can't stay anonymous anymore. Even if you use a VPN, you're still sort of in the the state knows where you are. So it's a natural progression. It is what it is.
So much, and I open this round to the audience. So if you have your questions to.
Sorry for being late, and thank you for the opportunity of asking the question. My name is Ishan Tiwari. I'm a lawyer, researcher, independent researcher. Now, the question everybody is thinking from the India's perspective, that is understandable. But what about China's role in India's sphere of influence? When we say, let's say we talk about Sri Lanka, we talk about Bangladesh, we talk about Nepal. So I'm just concerned about the neighborhood, the expansive neighborhood that we have and China also has. Look at their strength and look at where we stand. How do we counter that narrative?
My name is Pavan. My question is directed to Madam Anushka Saxena. You mentioned about the jointness of command, which Chinese PLA has already, in fact, is more at the advanced stage. So can you delve in detail what will be the key learnings? Because the size-wise, India and China, they match. Plus the challenges also, military challenges also are more or less on the same kind of platform. So what challenges Chinese have faced? What will be the key learnings for the Indian theaterization of command right now, which is going on under CDS? Thank you.
Hello, sir. Prabir from Delhi University. So my question is towards Professor Yelleri. This communique talks about a lot of market order, all forms of ownership, and it also talks about national security, which is the political security and the security of the party. Now, in mid of all this chaos, how would the party would ensure, probably would entice and reassure the foreign investor in investing in China? Because we have the data, World Bank data on the 2023 for FDI inflows in China and pretty much dismal figures. So, yeah.
Okay, so this is a pretty large question. Insofar as the Third Plenum, and so I'll limit it to what the Third Plenum says, I think the reference to the internal and the external I was also taking off from what Anushka said. This is key. Whatever the Chinese are doing in our neighborhood has roots in China's internal policy. So if the Chinese are interested in maintaining regime power at home, you can also expect a certain kind of foreign policy or a certain kind of attitude towards governments in not just, of course, in South Asia, but also elsewhere. And we have an immediate example in the case of Afghanistan. When the democratically elected government, the Republican government, was in power in Afghanistan, in Kabul, the Chinese were constantly insisting that they open negotiations with the Taliban. And the Chinese were even mediating, were sort of playing midwife to these negotiations. But once the Taliban took over, there's no such thing as, go back to, an open space for democratic forces in Afghanistan. So for the Chinese, the nature of their party system or the nature of their government means that democratic governments anywhere are an existential threat to the Chinese system. So in case of South Asia, we must expect more support for authoritarian systems, non-democratic systems, and this has a direct consequence to our security interests, our foreign policy interests, and so on. A brief reference was made to the BRI. I think because South Asia is sort of the main, if you look at the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, it's the main area of, is one of the main areas of the BRI's activity. You will see that in Pakistan itself, the BRI has been changing shape. But the Chinese are not in control of all the changes. You see in Pakistan itself a great deal of resistance now emerging to Chinese influence or intervention in the Pakistani economy. Forget everything else but Pakistan economy. So I think in many ways, just as the case with China's support for authoritarian regimes, essentially the biggest consequence is that we will be left having to clean up or deal with the consequences of China's actions. And because South Asia is is a neighbor of China, is a large population area, as an underdeveloped area, the problems have a tendency to magnify or grow rather quickly. So that's something that we have to keep an eye open for, watch out for.
Sir, Anushka, could you take the question on the jointness of the PLA?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, just to quickly add one point to what Dr. Jacob said on the question on China's influence in South Asia. Can I just say, maybe as practice, we should avoid using the phrase sphere of influence, because if you think from the perspective of foreign policy prerogatives of all of our neighboring states, it is their prerogative to balance and hedge between India and China. And countering Chinese influence is one question, but it's nobody's sphere of influence, right? So I think that would be something to consider. On the question of failures and successes of jointness and how the kind of Indian theaterization model can take it into account. So given that India has currently experimented very little with theaterization, it's very difficult to say what our trajectory is going to be like. But a few PLA kind of reform challenges and failures that we should definitely take into account that may be reflected in what our theaterization model looks like at the moment are these, right? First is that you need mobilization commanders that have experience of experimenting with what it's like to fight in different, not theater commands, but theaters of operation, right? So like I gave the example of Wu Yanan and his leadership, or the new leadership of the Southern Theater Command. You cannot have somebody from the ground forces practicing as theater commander of the Southern Theater Command, especially when they have had no previous experience with jointness related operations or operations in the central theater, where they have the opportunity to understand what the party bosses want better, right? So in that sense, I think one of the things to sidestep would be to not have talent management and talent execution related problems. So upskilling commanders in understanding what kind of weapon systems are best suited to interoperability between the ground, naval, and air forces, what who are we preparing to fight for, what we're preparing to fight for. I mean, this is not a failure but a success of the PLA, right? They've defined really well that we want to fight the kind of war that we know as high intensity, short duration, and localized. So we don't have ambitions to fight global wars, but wars in our neighborhood, wars in our backyard, if I may say so, and wars that we can end quickly using both personnel skills and technology, right? So I think these are primary questions to answer. That who we're preparing for, what we're preparing for, and who can best kind of manage this kind of a role. The other thing I think in the post of the CDS is that we understand that CDS dons many hats, right? Military advisor, head of the Department of Military Affairs, in the Defense Acquisition Council, on the Nuclear Advisory Council, so on and so forth, right? But none of these hats really means that somebody like the CDS has the authority to conduct wartime mobilization, right? So the CDS has great control over joint planning and planning jointly, which is coming together to plan something and coming out with a single document instead of just pooling documents from different services and kind of discussing joint strategy. So the CDS can do all of that really well and enable that, but he can't really invest in combat preparedness work or in work that actually enables wartime mobilization. So I think that's another thing to learn from the Chinese theaterization model. And the final thing I'd say is that, like I said, talent management is a great challenge. You asked the question and you mentioned that there is some parity in numbers, not entirely, but there is some parity, at least on the border. I know for a fact deployment is equivalent. But when theaterization actually happens, it is inevitable. It happened in the US, it happened in Russia, which has which doesn't exactly have the same theaterization model as the US, but maybe more closer to China. But this happened with every country attempting to theaterize their military forces, that they would have to demobilize personnel because they have to make room for equipment and interlinking technologies that can help advance the progress of jointness. Now, with employment as a question and with factors such as Agniveer playing out, with our inability to create a non-lapsable modernization fund, I don't know how we're going to handle the question of demobilization. So this definitely requires a greater reading of how resettlement can be financed and how demobilized personnel can be resettled before on our journey to kind of take care of theaterization.
Sir, there was news yesterday or day before yesterday that IBM has pulled out of, particularly its research facilities. I mean, you spoke about it earlier. The whole romance of corporate America and China is souring. So how does it reassure? How does it reassure these foreign investors?
Well, in recent times, there have been two trends in China. One is, yes, a lot of enterprises have started pulling out of their investments from China, but they're not pulling out of China where there is still scope for the R&D facilities. I mean, the cases I'm talking about, one is the new material labs. Lot of foreign companies are still interested in China to start or establish the new material labs, because new material labs to buy, transport, and study the effectiveness, it is not possible to do it away from the sources. So there are few areas the foreign investors cannot still avoid China. That's number one. Apart from new materials, what the pandemic has taught us, that the health science or the sophistication of health sciences is still going to be the center of economy. That's a new economy, okay? If you study economics for several centuries, every time in every century, in couple of decades, there is a new force of economy. And I think after pandemic, people have realized that economists realized that, health science or health is the new economics. There was one product which the industry is used for car or automobiles. They're using the same product for health sciences. Now, the product like carbide, which is highly contagious and poisonous, has been used in the health sciences. This is a new invention after the pandemic. There is a huge, one big health science laboratory which is on the Shanghai Tongji University, which is the biggest in the world, which is investing into the new instrumentation engineering. Like you have the product engineering, right? There is a new segment of product engineering in health sciences, which has recently emerged. The new verticals China is looking into. So these are new areas the investors are not trying to escape from, and they have to go to China. And apart from that, I think you know all about the the organic laboratories. I think Umman is here. Actually, he will talk about it. How the Chinese population is best to use to test your new medications, new medicines. These are few things actually that China is attracting foreign investors. With regard to investments into hard capital, with regard to properties, I think there is a sense that deceleration is already happening. The foreign investors do not want to work on that or want to come in China. But remember one thing: there was a time when the provinces used to issue bonds, and then the Beijing would say that it's none of my business. Okay, in last 4 years, that things have changed. So now it's the center which is backing the provincial bond up to somewhere about $1 billion. So that means that there is some surety coming in. There were Swedish, German, and French investors who invested heavily in property developing in the industries. They have lost. There is no guarantee, there is no support by the Chinese state government. But these are the few areas where the Chinese state is coming forward to help them. Now, something which we do not really understand is China is also trying its hard to balance its decoupling. One has to understand that Chinese leaders are aware that the foreign technology will be an important part of their economy, and what if they pull out the plug, right? So Chinese are still, recently if you read how the state-owned enterprises and the Chinese enterprises are heavily dependent on the foreign technologies. Okay, more than dozens of foreign technologies, the state-owned enterprises are still buying it. What happens, interestingly, now you have the limited amount of units to spend. Okay, what you can spend on? You can spend on the new technologies, buy it, and then improve your capacities, or you don't buy it and still rely on the domestic technologies. The Chinese enterprises and then the big players do not want to compromise on these things. So next few years, the Chinese will keep on buying these technologies from the foreign enterprises. At the same time, they will keep on innovating. And interestingly, if you look at the indices here, if you look at data, whatever the new technology the Chinese are developing, who are the consumers? The Chinese are the consumers. The foreigners are the consumers. So there is number of small cycles. The innovation where the Chinese state putting a lot of revenue and funds is not producing anything but consumed by the domestic market. Okay, and the state-owned enterprises which is receiving a lot of funds now to hide that they are inefficient, they're buying these technologies from the Western so that they can perform and still keep their balance sheets. Remember I said about managing balance sheets. So two important lessons here. One, the Chinese will keep on inviting the foreign investors to invest into new horizons of technologies. These are new technologies and Chinese will ask foreign investor to buy. Second thing, till limited time, the central government will support and give the backing as far as the provincial bonds are concerned. And number three, now, since China knows that anything which is developed by the foreign enterprises, a technology or idea or a product, okay, financial product even, that has to be tested in the Chinese market. So China is still an attractive place, even if there are rising risks. So I remember I said, if who will invest if there are higher returns, and any place there are higher returns are the higher risks. This is a simple logic in economics. If there is a higher risk, that means the higher returns. And Chinese are trying to say that even if there are higher risks, there are higher returns. That's a simple bottom line. They wanted to give it after third plenum, before third plenum, and that is what they're doing it. Yes.
Two small questions, actually. One from Arvind. You see a lot of companies, especially foreign companies, are moving out of China. China plus one and all these tech companies, Samsung, Apple, everybody is moving. So what kind of focus China is having to stop this, out migration, and what other, policies they can make which can somehow stop this process? Especially when all these companies coming to India and Indian government is also going to open up. There has been some sort of recalibration. How will that play up? Especially when you said that the new opening up is very narrow and it's mostly in strategic emerging industries and all that. When you say the whole legitimacy of CCP is now going down because, for a long time we had this idea that CCP's legitimacy was basically as long as the economy was growing, everybody was profiting. So politics was somehow a kind of a avoidable subject. But now when the economy is going down, will only the repression be a tool for CCP, or will they also adopt some other tools to somehow pacify the population?
Hi, my name is Antara and I'm a China fellow at ORF. My question is also similar to what Dr. Atul just asked. So China's economic challenges has really opened up opportunities for many countries like Mexico, like Vietnam, also India. So what I would like to understand from you is how successful has India been in terms of benefiting from China plus one strategy, and what more can we do? At the same time, I see a lot of disappointment in China about companies like Apple moving out of China and coming to India. So what this new round of competition between China and India in terms of economic competition, in a way, how is it going to impact our political relations going forward?
My name is Tarchin. I'm Tibetan independent researcher. Yeah. Xi Jinping used to have a lot of reform everywhere. But when we look at that how the Deng Xiaoping strategy and then Jiang Zemin and Wu Qingtao did, it completely seems different from Xi Jinping's reform. We are seeing everything getting controlled and strict. So how do you read that Xi's reform, so-called reform?
So I would like to answer the first question by Atul. What China is doing to stop the migration? Migration of industries out of China is certainly a challenge, but if it is coming to countries like India, it is really unpleasant for China. That's number one. Second thing is, what in a sense China is losing? I think one has to ask the question. China has been always an economy which worked on the incremental manufacturing. Okay, what China used to do, for example, I give you, and I think this is I learned out of my one of my job opportunities. A Starbucks mug, which is produced in China, is for 0.4 cents, right? And it is sold in the US market for more than $15. What China loses is that incremental manufacturing, not the technology. Okay, if you're talking about most of the enterprises which have moved out of China, they have moved out of China in the areas of assembly lines. So China is happy to let them go. But if those enterprises which are into the hardcore technology, the China is not really happy. Like Kalpit mentioned about IBM. IBM was never into the consumer products. IBM was always into corporate data saving, tapes, large memories, and China would be really unhappy to let those enterprises go. In recent 8 years, if you see that what the industries China has lost, I think I would just give you a broad idea. Approximately 70% of these enterprises were into the incremental manufacturing, where the China used to import the parts, okay, they call parcel law basically, and then they used to assemble them, and then they used to export it. And because of the lower tariffs to importing those parts and parcel, and then the lower tariffs in exporting them and importing the importing countries, China benefited a lot. And that's the reason China created the two surpluses, capital surpluses and trade surpluses. China is not really worried about it. What China is worried about is if the enterprises which are into critical technologies are going out, that's a problem. I'll tell you one case here. Apparently, Boeing was in talks with, I don't know if Anushka or Jabin might have heard about, to develop new materials, okay? The new materials are for the armors. Usually those who are into the defense industry, they know this very well. Boeing stopped it. Boeing said, we are no more doing it actually because, I think there's a pressure after the Trump coming in and, it was pressurized to do it. So if these technologies are withdrawing from China, China is definitely not happy. Otherwise, China is not doing much because if you see today, most of the cutting edge technologies, if you're talking about electronics, communications, the Chinese have the best competitors. One more things to add here. China is getting out of these, there was one pressure point which always put on kneel down, made China kneel down. That was standardization. You take 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G technologies. Those were one ecosystem where the Chinese manufacturers were forced to adopt and create equipments. If you talk about the 6+, 7+ technologies, the Chinese have developed their own ecosystem and standardizations. China is already on the way to get out of the standardization. So China really do not want any dependencies on these technologies. So if these companies are in China and going to compete, definitely these companies did not have a good role because Huawei will always be the first preference for China Telecom, China Unicom, or China Mobile, right? So anyway, there was a shrinking market for these foreign enterprises. So that's the quickest answer. I'm not sure if I've answered that entirely. Now, a question of Bantra, how much India has actually capitalized on China Plus? 2017-18, I think Bloomberg came up with a report saying that India is also part of China Plus, and then India is also one country, which will benefit those industries which are moving out of China. But the data says that, as you correctly mentioned, in Southeast Asia, it was Vietnam which was winning. And largely, if you look into the Western Hemisphere, it was Mexico who was winning, and partly Brazil also. Now, why India is capitalizing on it has its own reason why basically we are still not happy actually, we are still working on the lowest, what is called downstream manufacturing. India is still good in the downstream manufacturing, not upstream manufacturing. So we are the best places for those industries which are looking into the downstream manufacturing. But at the same time, India is also forced by the other countries like European Union to comply by the environmental standards. Okay, that is not the case with Vietnam, that is not the case with Cambodia, that's not the case with the Philippines. So eventually, when India will realize that downstreaming of this manufacturing is not going to help entirely, that's the problem. That's where we'll have the break even. One more reason is when India is an option to China, but India doesn't have any option to China in terms of trade. And I have been always talking about this theory of, intermediate cycles. The moment we catch up with China, China moves ahead. You take about new plastics, okay? I'm not talking about a plastic which is used as a wrapper. A plastic which you use in a mouse, thermostat products, these mics, anything. We get them from China. By the time we're producing the wrappers over here, chocolate wrappers or anything here, we realize, oh no, there is a new product in my mobile needs, my laptop needs, we again go back to China. And there are more than 1,000 products. We have developed these, intermittent cycles. The moment we catch up with China, China moves ahead. That is the entire difference. The structural difference is this. We try to buy something cheaper, which is outdated from China, or maybe countries which the China have abandoned. And then we produce and we say that we're happy, we can do it. No, but buying 3 lines, because in production, in manufacturing, see, there are cycles you have to understand. The smartest manufacturing cycle is 3 years. The rudiment, the traditional manufacturing cycle is as short as 7 days or 10 days. We're happy to 7 and 8 days and say that decoupling, yes, thumbs up. No, that's not going to solve the problem. Because whenever there's a quality product, we are still dependent on that. What happens with our decoupling with that? We have glasses. I'll give you a simple example here. Sorry if you stop me if you're taking a long time. Glass. Glass is the simplest product, but also one of the most prestigious product. Look at on the table. We're happy having glass products. But most of these glass have been produced by China in a place near Shenzhen. And you never notice it. There is always a tolerance level in the glass. You never notice it. Amount of bubbles in the glass decides the price. You never notice it. Today you will go and check that actually, right? That China produces the glass cheaper than India with the tolerance level, less tolerance level. That means the Chinese are actually efficient even in the downstream product manufacturing. We have never heard of these words. We have never heard about these processes. We are, like Xi Jinping used about 100 terms in his speech, in his reports. Sorry, I'm not trying to be nihilist here, but what I'm trying to say is that we do not care these cycles. These cycles are equally important when you're trying to replace China. Have we? Vietnam did. Lot of products. You're talking, we lost textile. We lost leather to Vietnam. A lot of these industries we have lost to Vietnam because Vietnam matched that tolerance level. Vietnam matched that SPS certification level. We do not know that produce karne ke baad bhi certificate lagta hai. I mean, we never know that, right? Okay, these are small nuances, I think, because of which I think it is difficult to make India what is it called? An option for China. Because we haven't understood the nuances of manufacturing. We know these synonyms of manufacturing. It's a big statement, but this is something where we lack. And we have to accept it with all humility. If we want to compete with China, we have to understand these small, finer nuances to at least be in the racks on the stand with the Chinese product. And that's where I think that makes the entire difference why we are not a good competition to China. Sorry if I have taken a long time.
You have a question? No.
Oh, right. No, I just wanted to make a point to Antra's question about India leveraging China plus one. I think in addition to everything Dr. Yelri has said, which I agree with, I think the issue of standardization is something that we even see in drone components, right? We've placed a ban on the import of drone components, but the NATO standards for unmanned aerial vehicles and airworthiness are something that it's a process that India has been unwilling to undertake. And so, we cannot follow the path of indigenization or try to get investments in, the manufacture of cheap dual-use components such as maybe drone components without really integrating with these standards. But I think the two other things on why India has been unable to capitalize on the moment, right? The moment is right. It's the exact same as what China had in the 70s. The world was willing to open up to it. The businesses were looking for locations, offshore locations to relocate some of their businesses, and we have similar sentiment in the world today. And most importantly, China's consumer base is something that India can match, right? Ours is second only to China's. But I think the two really important reasons why we haven't been able to capitalize is one, and it's a product of diplomacy, right? That when stuff like rules of origin comes into place, for example, if we import something from China, maybe downstream components, and then add value to them and come out with final products, we have to be able to export them with impunity, given that the image of products coming out of China are facing all sorts of rules of origin related barriers, right? This has to be a product of diplomacy, that if Tesla manufactures a car in China using Chinese components, it can face 100% import tariffs. But if Tesla manufactures a car in India using Chinese components, it doesn't face the same tariff, right? And the second thing is, of course, FDI and the regulatory restrictiveness, right? Vietnam has one of the freest kind of openness in terms of business, right? But if you look at the Indian context, just to write a research article, you have to fill a billion different forms, including GST and tax and so on and so forth. Right? That just speaks to the on-ground reality of the our openness to business. So I think that's another factor where we've been unable to kind of capitalize on the right context.
Okay, just quickly to Atul's question, I wouldn't exactly say that the Communist Party's legitimacy is going down or going up. It's certainly been affected by China's economic performance for sure. So what is the CPC's response? So there is an explanation. There's three different responses. One, it provides an explanation of why things are the way they are. Two, it pushes back when criticism goes out of bounds. And three, like all smart political operators, there's also a policy response. It might not acknowledge sometimes, but that there is a problem, but it certainly knows that something needs to be done. So, for example, the question of unemployment, right? This is a major reason for questions about the Communist Party's legitimacy. How is disaffection due to unemployment viewed? On one hand, I mean, one thing that Xi Jinping says is that, look, this is life, get used to it. We all suffered great. And he constantly uses his own example of his time as a sent-down youth during the Cultural Revolution. That, is what parents tell children all the time, right? In my time, I walked to school. You guys have such comfortable lives. So get used to taking a bit more of difficulty. So he's trying to toughen up the Chinese population, the youth, and saying, well, get used to it. And actually, Xi Jinping has been preparing his people for a very long time to get used to this. His idea, he looks at Chinese society as a society practically preparing for war, preparing for conflict. And if you have to fight with the Americans, we need Chinese people to be tougher to take the knocks than American people are, and so on. So that's the thing. So, when he calls for national rejuvenation, it's not about just the economy. It's about the political rejuvenation, military rejuvenation, even physical rejuvenation. So you have rules such as telling kids how much time you can spend on, on screen. So there is a government legislation that says, you can only spend so much time. And there are strict rules about how men should comport themselves. I mean, men cannot be metrosexual, or men cannot appear effeminate. Men have to appear like men. So this is the level of control that the Chinese state sort of gets into. So this is the second response. In a sense, it's criticism, right? But the explanation also says, like in the document itself, it says, and I quote, "Take a realistic and pragmatic approach as we've worked to further unleash and develop the productive forces and tap into and boost the vitality of our society." So he's pointing the lens back at society and saying, you guys have the capacity, you have to be pragmatic, and you have to make use of your vitality. So essentially, the great leader is telling the people, keep working. Okay? Keep working. Yeah? Sorry? Yeah, you could say that, right? But this, I just want to remind everybody, this applies across political systems. So there is criticism, for example, of the Thangping, the lie flat movement among young people. So the policy response is simple. There's a whole section in the reform, the resolution saying, deepening reform, number 10, deepening reform in the cultural sector. So improving public communication and cultural work. This is essentially, this is re-education. And if you look at how, surveillance technology has moved in China, it moved from the coastal areas, it moved to the western regions where it scaled up, right? You have this kind of surveillance that is, of a whole people, like Uyghurs, for example. And then it moves back to what you call regular China or mainland China, where it is now ubiquitous. It is across the system. Everybody is being surveilled, but not everybody is. So same thing with, propaganda and cultural work. It's a form of political re-education. So this is a policy response. If you are criticizing, clearly you've not understood our great plans. So we are going to tell you. So deepening, when you say culture, it's not theater and music. It's essentially a particular way to approach or understand Chinese society or Chinese politics. So that's why I say it's constantly, when you talk about culture, it's constantly, very soon in the sentence or the sentence after, you will hear the word ideology, right? So it talks about, part of cultural sector is developing new mechanisms for promoting patriotism and organize themed public activities. So everything is public activity in an effort to create a social atmosphere in which people look up to heroes, pay tribute to martyrs, and strive to become pioneers. Essentially, trying to deflect attention from the problem by nationalism, patriotism, etc. So this is one of the policy responses. Finally, just to quickly to Tarchin's question, the difference between Xi's reforms and Teng's reforms, one is of course the context, two is ambition, and I think three, I think essentially what Arvind said, constantly stay ahead of the competition. This is what the Chinese are doing. Thank you.
In fact, I'm sure there are many more questions, but I think we've completely run out of time and we've gone a little overboard. So I'm sorry for that. And but thank you, Professor Jacob. Thank you, Professor Yellery, and thank you, Anushka, for your time. And please join us for refreshments in the the next room. And I also thank Atul and Antara for organizing this brilliant session on the plenum. So thank you so much.